just.
All right. So I guess we'll get started. It is now 12, and I first of all want to thank everybody who's attending our session on emerging changes in radiology residency, the new normal. And we're going to talk about two main topics. We are going to start with the new virtual normal, as well as the second part of our conversation will be on the new APDR parental leave policy. We are joined by Dr. Cheri Canon, who will be representing the APDR as someone who is very much involved in it from the APDR end. And then we also have some PDs to say how they do it. So first, we're going to start off with the new virtual normal in radiology residency, where we are fortunate enough to have Dr. Omer Awan from the University of Maryland and Shanna Matalon from Brigham and Women's Hospital to lead off that discussion. Also, please use the Q&A feature to answer questions, and I will monitor it, to ask questions, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here. Just confirming you can all see my slides that I've shared. Okay, so I'll start. I will just spend the next couple of minutes sharing the Brigham and Women's experience, which is, what I know well at this point. And I'm going to focus on really 4 topics. So we have formal teaching, informal teaching, camaraderie and morale, and some miscellaneous things. And, I'll do my best also to highlight the silver linings of COVID, because obviously we know that COVID has been a really trying time in many ways for all of us. It's been a long, almost 2 years, believe it or not. But, I think that COVID has forced us to be creative and make quick changes that maybe wouldn't have otherwise been made in a sort of normal life experience. It's forced us to be iterative, and I think there are a lot of things that are here to stay, so we can talk about what's working and what's not working. So for formal teaching, at least at our institution, we've sort of kept our conference schedule. We have 30-minute morning conference, which is usually case conference, and we have 60 minutes around noontime. And that tends to be a combination of lecture-based and case conferences as well. And we're currently using Microsoft Teams. So the residents are sort of spread out throughout the hospital. They log in from their own devices, usually laptop, sometimes an iPhone. And that's how we've been doing it really since this all started. So, some pros or the silver lining of this new approach is that the Teams, Microsoft Teams or virtual conferences is now accessible to all of our residents, as well as our faculty teachers, regardless of their rotation site. We're a pretty big institution, and while the majority of our residents are on campus, there are sometimes rare rotations that are off-site. So this allows everyone to participate. Theoretically, there's less time wasted walking to and from conference. Again, our hospital is like a mile long from start to finish. So if you're on one side of the hospital to get to our old conference room, you could waste up to 15, 20 minutes walking. We are now able to record all of our conferences seamlessly. Our program coordinators just set it to record at the beginning of the day, and our attendance is more easily documented. Some of the cons, now we don't really have a home base and the residents are more spread out. It can be hard for the residents to find a quiet space outside the reading room to participate in conference. And they have this loss of camaraderie of being able to have lunch together every day and things like that. We've had decreased interaction with both the peers and the instructors. A lot of times the cameras are off, whether there's not a camera at the workstation they're working at, or they just feel funny having the camera on wherever they're sitting. There's also less opportunity for teamwork. Before COVID, we were doing a lot more team-based case conferences, which the residents really enjoyed for camaraderie and peer teaching. And then there's the issue with sort of suboptimal IT. It can be very clumsy if there are multiple residents participating in the same room, hard to see who's there. You get the reverberation of people's microphones and things like that. I wanted to share a screenshot though of our abdominal fellowship. You can see we've been recording every conference. They're easily available on Microsoft Teams. It's pretty seamless, and that's been one really nice silver lining. As far as formal teaching, sort of a downfall, I think is, things like the New England Rank and Race Society. I know a lot of people have local rank and race societies. These used to be in person. It was a wonderful opportunity for residents from nearby institutions to meet each other and network. Now these are all virtual, so still wonderful teaching opportunities and learning opportunities, but really missing that sort of networking and camaraderie idea. A little bit about informal teaching and readouts. We wrote this paper sort of at the beginning of the pandemic. We just did an open survey to residents, fellows, and faculty about their perceptions of the new virtual readouts. And we looked at both sort of live screen sharing type readouts, but then also asynchronous readouts where the faculty member is reviewing the report offline separately from the trainee. And we found that there were a lot of themes that came up, and there were really three positive, overwhelmingly positive themes. Obviously, social distancing benefited. I think less of an issue now that everyone is, vaccinated and boosted, but there was a positive in autonomy and competency. Residents, especially senior residents and fellows, really liked the fact that they didn't have to sit around and watch us read negative studies anymore, and that those were read offline. And people really enjoyed the use of new technology and being creative with it. But there were some negative things that we saw that I think still persist today. There's definitely a little bit of a loss of feedback and education opportunities when we're reading sort of offline or asynchronously. And then also, I think it's a little bit harder to build that sort of nice professional social relationship when you're reading offline or even virtually, but live. We recently, Dan Souza, our program director in Abdomen, recently surveyed the fellows just to see what their preferences were. And we found that, there's really mixed feelings about reading out live through Microsoft Teams, but there's a strong preference for a combination of side-by-side readouts and asynchronous readouts. So I have a feeling that a resident survey would look similarly just based on anecdotal discussion, but this still needs to be done. Finally, camaraderie and morale. I think probably this is what a majority of us are all feeling right now. It's been a tough time, a lot of people feeling isolated, fewer opportunities to get together. This was a wonderful article that I acknowledge came out, in the more beginnings of COVID, and things have obviously changed since there's been vaccinations and people are feeling a little bit more safe to get together. But they found that the, perception of resident morale was, marked to moderately decreased. Similarly, program directors' morale was also minimally to markedly decreased. This is a pretty big deal. So at Brigham, we've been doing our best to do safe social activities all outside. This was sort of like a duck tour that we organized for the first year residents to get to know Boston. We recently had a pre-recruitment get together since there's no more pre-recruitment dinners, and this was at an outside sort of bar with some appetizers. This was our welcome party. So some silver linings is these are, more intentional. People, I think, really look forward to them more than they did before. Doing our best to do things during the workday. Also, we had a little ugly sweater party, which was really fun. We have our annual resident retreat, which in the past was in person. Now we did it virtual this year, but the residents still enjoyed the opportunity to be off service, get together, and sort of have a positive look at how we can improve our residency. We've also integrated some, after hours Zoom events. This was like a new parents event, sort of, help with children's sleep. That was a great event that was organized by one of our faculty, and both residents, fellows, and attendings took part in this. So a couple of miscellaneous silver linings I thought were worth mentioning. We've really integrated our clinical workflow into Microsoft Teams. So we now have virtual divisions for every subspecialty of radiology, and embedded in these virtual divisions are these virtual reading rooms. So any ordering provider can pop into one of these reading rooms during the day for a consult. These are run by fellows, residents, and attending. So it's a really nice opportunity to consult, even if people don't feel comfortable coming down to the reading room. We've also incorporated a lot of alumni events, which we didn't have previously. So really much better alumni engagement. We've had some after hours events. This was sort of like a career planning type event. It was really great, very well attended by the residents. We've been really lucky that we've been creative with opportunities for medical students. We did, and I know a lot of other institutions have done similar sort of virtual mini electives, especially targeting opportunities for underrepresented minorities and women in radiology. There's been a lot of advantages to recruitment. I could probably talk about this for 30 minutes, but a lot of programs using this as first looks, ways to sort of get themselves out there, which really we weren't doing this before COVID. So I think in summary, there's obviously been a lot of bad and some negatives that have happened with COVID, but I think there have been a lot of silver linings, and I hope, we can sort of tip the scale to the silver linings aspects and learn from each other. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Dr. Awan has to say next.
All right, can everyone see my slides here? All right. Well, thank you so much, Shanna, for that wonderful overview. And thank you, Carolyn and the APDR, for inviting me to this APDR seminar. It's an honor to do this. I want to just briefly talk about some of the changes that we've seen at University of Maryland and hopefully offer some insights into some best practices with respect to, the new virtual normal. So, I only want to highlight literally two things, and that's, the virtual hybrid readouts and the virtual hybrid lectures. Because I think that's the crux of what we do as educators. And this is the crux of kind of what we're doing and the major transformation that we've seen, from COVID-19 and the pandemic. So, and I think it's also important just to kind of understand what the perceptions are of residents and attendings with respect to virtual readouts. So we did a survey. Our residency program is, medium in size. We have 40 residents in our program. We surveyed all the residents in our program, asking them about their perceptions about the virtual readouts and, how they feel about this new normal. And then we subsequently did a survey with APDR and all the chief residents through A3CR squared within AUR with the exact same questions that we did with our residency program. And coincidentally, the results were literally identical. So within 1 or 2 percentage points for residents and 1 or 2 percentage points with faculty. So virtually identical results, nationally and at University of Maryland. But I'm going to highlight just the results that we saw at University of Maryland. So the vast majority of residents preferred a hybrid readout style going forward in the future. But I think it's also important to understand that 46% of trainees actually preferred in-person readouts only. And I think 36% were opposed to hybrid readouts. So even though they were the majority and people felt that this was what they wanted to see in the future, at least a third of residents did not want hybrid readouts. So I think that's an important thing to understand, kind of moving forward. Sorry, this was the faculty perception. So we did this, we asked the same questions to faculty as well. And the faculty results were pretty similar to residents, but slightly less. So again, the majority of faculty preferred virtual hybrid readouts in the future, but 38% still preferred in-person readouts. I thought that was actually a pretty high number, to be honest with you, but 38%, preferred in-person readouts, and 29% were actually opposed to the hybrid readouts. So again, there still is this dichotomy and, mixed response from residents and faculty with respect to, what we anticipate and what we prefer, going forward in the future. But in terms of virtual readouts, it's my opinion that there's really no substitute for in-person learning. I think that there's tremendous amount of positivity when you learn in person, the mentorship, the camaraderie, the visual cues. None of that stuff can really be replaced when you have an in-person readout. But, I think the future is optimizing virtual readouts and, doing all we can to, supplement in-person readouts with virtual readouts, because there are benefits to the virtual environment that we all know, cost saving, time saving, commute saving, all the things that we already know. So I think it's very important to optimize this in a real way. And I think, there are different platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, like Shanna was talking about. One thing I think that's very important that sometimes isn't optimized is this notion of two-way screen sharing. So just as it's important for me to be able to share my screen with a trainee showing the images, they should also be able to share their screen to show you what their findings are. And I think that's something that's not emphasized enough, because we have to really allow the trainee to drive the readout sometimes as well. So if they're not able to share their screen, that's a problem. So I think IT personnel need to be able to optimize this for the experience to be as beneficial as possible. There should also be split screens. I've seen sometimes people reading out and they're only seeing the current study and not the prior study. So that's obviously a problem, right? Because in real life or in person, we're able to see the current study and the prior study at the exact same time. So if your screen sharing is not showing the prior study, that's a major disadvantage to your trainees and to your ability to read out your resident or fellow successfully. And the other thing is that questions have to be encouraged. One of the major cons during this during this survey that we administered was a lot of trainees felt a little bit more intimidated or less likely to ask questions during the readout when it was virtual. And that's obviously a problem, right? That is very concerning, quite frankly, because if a resident or a trainee can ask a question that he or she wants to ask, then we're doing a disservice to them in educating them about the imaging findings of a specific case. So you can just have a nice opportunity and have them put the questions in a chat box, or the culture has to be such that these questions are actually encouraged. I think cameras is a big deal. A lot of us are tempted to keep our cameras off, and if you keep the cameras on, you can benefit from the visual cues that you're attending or your resident is showing. You can see if they understand the concept or not. When the camera is off, we have no way of knowing if they're absorbing the material or not. So I always tell my residents to put their cameras on, because I think that it's a very powerful tool. It obviously can't simulate the actual in-person readout, but I think it can go a long way to make the virtual readout a lot more beneficial. In terms of virtual and hybrid lectures, moving on to the second aspect of this, is that this has really transformed the landscape of radiology education, right? I mean, this has allowed for wider dissemination of knowledge. We've had things like the APDR lecture series, MRI online, Health for the World. All these things have made, education accessible for everyone pretty much across the globe. And this has been, a really amazing opportunity to, reduce healthcare disparities throughout the world, which I think is, quite frankly, awesome. And it's allowed for residents who aren't on site to benefit from lectures. So, before, if you have a resident at the VA or at a satellite hospital, they weren't able to potentially benefit from the lectures, but now it's completely widespread. And that has really changed our opportunity to, reach as many residents as possible for these lectures. So, we currently at University of Maryland still encourage our speakers to be on site. We want them to experience the lecture as they did, to see a presenter present their material, to see their visual cues, again, their ability to interact with residents. I think that's extremely important. But, obviously there are some, there's exceptions to the rule. Sometimes attendees can't be there, and then we have it virtually, but we really encourage them to be on site to maximize the in-person experience as possible. When they're not on site, we really do encourage, there to be maximum engagement. And one way you can do that is through audience response. So incorporating, poll everywhere into Zoom, that's a possibility. There's a way to do that, right? There's an app for that. So that can certainly lead to increased learner engagement and allow people to be more engaged, as opposed to kind of just turning their cameras off and then, going and doing some sort of other errand without, paying attention to the actual lecture. So that can be a very powerful tool with the hybrid lectures. And again, cameras are a great tool. I always tell all my trainees to turn their cameras on. Even when I give a medical student lecture, the cameras have to be on, or otherwise, I literally refuse to give the lecture if I can't see them, right? Because then I have no idea if they are understanding anything that I'm saying. So I think those are very important, tips, I think, to optimize, hybrid lectures. So that's all I had. I wanted to make it extremely brief. Thank you so much. I think this was a nice compliment to what Shanna had said, and we're happy to take any questions if that's, Carolyn, what you want to do.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both, Omer and Shanna, for participating in this. I really appreciate it. I saw the papers you had both written, and I knew you guys would be excellent resources on this. So thank you very much. I wanted to move on to some questions. I actually have a few questions, but one of the questions appears to be, we are unable to capture a login list for contrast attendance at our institution because of security issues when we are using Zoom. Has anyone recorded the beginning part of Zoom and required the residents to log into the chat to get credit? I don't want to add this additional task to our program coordinators, but the honor system has been problematic. Yes, the honor system is always problematic. Anyone have an answer for that?
So we were previously using Zoom before Microsoft Teams, and we had the same issue. So that was part of the reason we transferred resident conference to Microsoft Teams. And I don't know personally the details, but I do know that our program coordinators have a very easy way now of seeing who entered the meeting and at what time. And I think you can even see what time they left. So it's still a tiny bit of manual work, because we do ensure that we're not docking residents who were on excused rotations, but it has been a little bit more seamless than Zoom.
So before I let Omar answer, because there's a piggyback question. So you just kind of alluded to it. Somebody asked, how do you do this through Teams? So you don't know the exact mechanism, but there is a way.
Yeah, I think there's like an automatic sort of list of attendees who attend the sort of pre-scheduled meetings.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Did you have any suggestions on that?
I don't have any great suggestions for this problem. This is an old age problem that I think we all struggle with, obviously. And, we don't have a great solution to this. Obviously, a resident can come in on Zoom, their camera can be off, they maybe go wander and do something else and, they get credit for it, but, they weren't really there, right? So, and then the other thing is that, we don't know how much they're participating and we haven't been able to really counter that well. But, with us, our lectures now are mainly in person, to be honest with you. We have very few people that now, we still have the Zoom option for people who, are, have other things going on with their family or, they're on vacation or they're at a different site. But, the vast majority of our lectures now are back to in person from July 1st. So, that problem doesn't exist as much in our program. But during the pandemic, it was definitely an issue for us that we don't have, quite frankly, we didn't solve correctly.
And I will tell you, it varies place to place. We are no longer allowed to have the residents together and speakers. They just changed our rules back. We just went back because of the surge in our city. So, I think it changes, but I agree it's difficult. And somebody here said they have the problem of tracking attendance because some of the residents go to a conference room and all watch together. So you've got one login, right? But there's like 8 residents. And some other suggestions given in the chat for QR codes. That's Carol Rumack says they have QR codes that they get at orientation they use for their attendance. And then Neil Madden said that if you require registration, it's actually easy to log via the Zoom and the Teams, I assume that is, the attendance. Chiefs take attendance at one program. The name is somewhat cut off here. I apologize, Kim something. And the camera must be on with their live picture. Somebody here, just Joseph Stuckelman shares, in Teams, the attendance report is provided to the organizer in the meeting feed and the feature must be turned on by the institutional Teams administrator. So I guess it is very possible, right? If your institution hasn't turned it on, you wouldn't be able to see it, but that's great. So those of you with Teams, you should find out who your team administrator is and go to them and they might be able to help you with that. All right, so that's that one. Let me see here. Another question, Dr. Awan, we don't have cameras on workstations in the reading rooms. Do you have your residents log in with their phones? You can answer that, but I can answer that too, because I'm at a workstation right now and I managed to figure out how to do a camera, but go for it.
We definitely do let residents log in through their phones. I have no issue with that personally. I mean, I prefer to see them, you know what I mean? Especially if they're not in the conference room. So again, the vast majority of our residents do come to the conference room. We have a very big conference room, for our 40 residents. But the ones that don't, we really, I'm not, if they decide not to put their cameras on, I mean, I can't stop them, right? I still want them to hear the lecture, and I'm of course not going to tell them that they can't, participate in the lecture. But it's something that's it's highly recommended from us, and I think that it adds a lot too. I mean, if you'll see that their responses and whether or not they're grasping a certain topic or how engaged they are, you can appreciate that, and you can change your lecture on the fly because of that, right? When that's not present, it makes it much more challenging, as I'm sure you all know.
Yep. So what my chair did is he authorized us to be able to get portable cameras through our book funds and our practice allowances, both attendings and residents. That way you have your own. I've got one of these little, I think it was $40. We each have it. You carry it in your backpack, your purse, whatever you want, and it comes with you, because we were going to buy them at first for every station. Then we noticed things tend to walk away when they're able to be removed. So the fear was that if my chair bought them for the whole department and installed them, we would slowly have them migrate elsewhere. So it's actually worked pretty well. I carry mine in my purse and I bring it everywhere I go. And so I can easily just plug it into the computer and put it up. And, it was a small cost out of a book fund. I mean, everyone has a few dollars left over. $40 wasn't much. So that's one way we've done it. But yes, I agree. Logging in on your phone is another way. Absolutely. Absolutely. Try to keep track of time here. Okay. Our residency uses a QR code at the beginning of the virtual lecture for resident sign-in, just like I think someone else said in the chat. Wonderful. So QR codes are popular. I'm taking these all down. On the rotations, do you excuse resident? On what rotations do you excuse residents from conference? We have traditionally excluded night flow procedural, adds up to quite a few rotations. That's a good question. I'll start with an answer here. So this is where I think the recorded lectures come in handy. So for example, for us, it was our IRPD that really demanded we start recording the lectures. And actually, I have a question for everybody on recorded lectures, and we'll get back to the full thing too. So he requested we do it because their procedures sometimes run into lunch. I have a lot of attendings refusing to have their lectures recorded. And I find that interesting because I give lectures everywhere, right? And I mean, I guess I have my lectures posted online. Apparently I'm crazy and liberal with the access to my lectures. How do you guys deal with that? Because I agree. I think one of the ways I deal with this for night float and procedural rotations, again, to answer this question, Dr. Raj, is we have the recordings and they can watch the recordings. And that's how I've dealt with it. And it sounds like both Mass Brigham and Maryland have dealt with it that way. But what do you do? And these are my questions to you guys, since you do it too, is to get them to record. They are really anti having it recorded. Or I've said, you can record it, but after 1 week, you need to delete it and all this stuff. How do you deal with that?
We haven't had that many people refuse recording that I've noticed. It hasn't been a major issue for us.
We're over 50% refuse where I am.
Wow.
And these aren't people giving big national talks and stuff to say that that's why. That's the only reason I can think of. I just don't understand the reasons behind it, unless you're afraid of someone stealing your intellectual property kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we've had zero pushback for recorded lectures. We record all of our lectures. We've had, to my knowledge, we've had no faculty member that has said no, that we can't do that. I can appreciate why people would have an issue. I mean, if they have images that they've taken from somewhere, for those intellectual property rights, they don't want that associated with their name. They may have some, fears associated with that. But, yeah, I don't have a good answer for you because I've had zero pushback, at University of Maryland with respect to that.
Okay, so I have two other people chiming in on this. So Eric England said they have a no option to opt out like that, and they've gotten no pushback. And then Neil Madden did say at Tufts, majority are refusing.
Wow.
So that's interesting. It just seems very institutional specific. And another one, Glenna Clark says, we used to have pushback, but since some retire, we just have said we are recording all and no option not to record. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't really fully understand it, especially if it's used, we tell them it's only internal. So that's the thing I'm not understanding is if we've guaranteed it's only internal. Yeah. So let's see what ensuring all stay in house and password protected is not Shauna's other suggestion. I agree. Only available to internal viewers. I agree. I think ensuring that educational is valuable. So Carol Remek says educationally, it's so valuable for residents and faculty to have access. I agree to these lectures. I think Neil brings up a good point, fear that anything can be posted online, that someone could I agree. I could take my phone right now, right? And videotape all of this and post it on YouTube or whatever. I can see that. See, there's Susan agrees, nothing's internal only. Nothing's internal only. And piggybacking on that, my question was, what platform do you keep the recorded lectures on? So we keep them as MP3s that we record off of Zoom. How about you guys? And I might have skipped a question. We'll go back.
Yeah, we record on Zoom. It's an MP4 video, and we just post it on an internal password protected site that the residents have access to.
Yeah, we're a Dropbox. We put the MP, whatever they are, in a Dropbox. Let's see. Have you had any problems in faculty election to give lecture? All right. So here's another one. Susan Hobbs asks, have you had any problems getting faculty to give lectures since then? They say they don't need to give it anymore in subsequent years. It's just, been recorded. So then you have the opposite problem. If it's recorded, then they don't want to give it every year. They want you to play recording. Do you know where I did have that problem? I did a breast course for New England Rank and Race Society. And a lot of people said, can I just record my lecture? And do I have to be in person sort of thing? So I haven't had that issue at all. I have not had that issue at all. I have had attendings refuse to give lecture if there weren't an X number of residents in person. I have had that, which now I've told them they can't do that because we're back to, 6 residents only allowed in one room, blah, blah, blah. But I have not. Has anyone else had that issue with people not wanting to give it after it's been recorded? Or has no one got to the year rotation yet for that to start? Something for us all to look forward to.
We haven't had anyone refuse yet, but I can imagine that this may be coming now that we've been, more consistently recording. But, my thought process is like, could we be creative with this? Maybe the residents sort of preview a previously recorded talk, and then we could do something interactive in person instead.
Okay.
I think that might be something valuable. The question though is, how much pre-work are we giving them? If it's like an hour-long recorded lecture, that's really not fair to ask them to watch that on their own time. But maybe we can, sort of cut these down, edit them to make them 15-minute snippets or something like that.
That's great. That's great. So I'm going to cut this question and answer session off because I do not want to take away from the next, also important. But could Omar and Shanna, could you guys look in the Q&A and maybe type some answers to things? So I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question. I'll read 1 or 2 more things from the chat. Someone said you can post the videos on Blackboard is another places, and new innovations. But we will make sure that you guys get your questions answered typed. Okay. So now I would like to move on to our next topic, which is the new ABR parental leave policy and how people are applying this. So we're going to start off with Dr. Cheri Cannon, who's going to tell us about how the policy came about, what the ABR was kind of thinking, and how they envision this. And then we're going to move on to Drs. Ho and Dr. Mercado, who are going to tell us how they're implementing it and the, things so far that have worked and some maybe roadblocks or things they've had to modify. So thank you.
All right, so thanks, Carolyn, appreciate it. So my name is Cheri Cannon. I'm the chair of radiology at UAB, but pertinent to our conversation today, I serve on the American Board of Radiology Board of Governors, and I'm going to share my screen. And I have to apologize, I'm right over our emergency department, so we will likely be battling sirens. So a little bit of background and to remind you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you, because one thing in the ABR we really valued in creating this was the partnership we had with the program directors. It was absolutely key in this process, and I'll go into that in a little more detail. But to remind everyone, back way earlier in this year, in fact, last year, the American Board of Medical Specialties put down a requirement for all of its boards, so the American Board of Radiology, to implement a parental leave policy. And it gave a few guidelines, but it was otherwise fairly open-ended. And 2 of the stipulations were, 1, this had to be in place for all residencies greater than 2 years or greater. And 2, it had to include a minimum of 6 weeks of leave during any single residency. So that was the starting point. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the policy itself and now our coming training verification attestation that you each will be signing. So to the point of the partnership, we had so many meetings, many with our program directors around developing this policy. And it was key because, initially, like all things, seems super simple. Should we have parental leave policy? Well, yes. And should be pretty easy, right? And as we got into the weeds, clearly it wasn't. So as you are all aware, it very much evolved. So here is the actual policy. So beginning with this academic year, residents will be considered eligible for initial certification without an extension of training. And that's an important statement here, with the time off that does not exceed an average of 8 weeks, that is 40 work days per academic year over the duration of residency. Now, a couple of things here. All this does is pertain to the minimum amount of time that's required to be able to sit for the exam. That's the main thing. A lot of people ask, well, why did you do it per year? But you have to remember, as ABR, we represent several specialties. And so this was going to be pertinent to radiation oncology, medical physics, as well as DR and DRIR. So that's an important thing to remember. And under the comment here, it's averaged 8 weeks, but it can be used from our standpoint. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean your standpoint, but it could be used variably. So under the comment, although very unlikely, you can have a resident that took 2 weeks off each year and then 26 off in their R4 year and still be able to meet this requirement. So as we look here, this is not really for every resident. This is really for the exceptions of residency, right? For those people who had these unanticipated, very important leaves of absence. So we don't want every resident to expect that they should have this or that you should provide this. We also need to realize that this is just one component to establish competency. So comment here, the ABR intended to have a flexible policy. That is, we wanted to give you program directors the greatest flexibility to allow for this family, caregiver, and medical leave without requiring additional training. So that's the key. If this policy isn't met, then they have to undergo additional training. But we need to understand too, and I think initially this was a lot of the conversation, this is subject to local, state, federal, your hospital HR policy. This does not supersede any of that. And I will give you an example. You know, we immediately had residents say, well, the ABR requires that you give me this time off. And we had to educate them and say, no, that's not what this policy is doing. Now, we do know there are residents clearly that begin training prior to this 2021. And so there is an ability for these people to, with your approval, the program director, to apply for an exemption. And that is, we don't want to make it unfair across R1s versus R4s. And we also don't want this new policy to surprise individuals. And so the example was given here. Let's say one of your residents took 16 weeks off during their R1 year. They would still be allowed to take an average of 8 weeks off in the remaining years, but this will be as part of an exception process. So what is time off? Really everything not pertaining to education. So vacation, bereavement, interview days, any parental leave, caregiver leave, medical leave, or any other leave that you determine really isn't part of the educational program. So what's considered part of the residency? Any research activities as determined by you, attendance at scientific meetings, educational meetings, off hours because of post-call as an example, or float, that's just built into the normal education residency. And then work days performed off-site. That is, if residents are doing some version of telehealth, or if they've even been pulled to another service as part of the pandemic. All of that falls into education. So the next thing we're going to move into is the training verification that is currently under revision. And this incorporates language reminding everyone that successful completion is not just about, if you will, time served, but it's in the other of 3 months of imaging and breast, 4 months in nukes. But it's also really around all of the core competencies and specifically professionalism, because professionalism is just an area that we cannot test for as part of board certification. So here's the current draft language that you would be signing. I further verify that the candidate has satisfactorily achieved appropriate skills, knowledge, and performance in the 6 core competencies as listed here. So with that, I am going to stop and turn it over to the next speaker.
Okay, I can go next, Chris, if you want. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hold on. Okay. So I just, in continuation, when we think about, a resident's leave of absence for parental leave, there are things you need to consider. So how much time a resident is allowed to take, and this is really dictated by, or I should say unpaid by FMLA, right? So FMLA allows the employees to take up to 12 working weeks of unpaid leave time within a 12-month period. And then in New York State, we also have the New York State Paid Family Leave Bank, which adds a few more days. And that's sort of like on a sliding scale, and that can be tacked on to FMLA, but I won't go into that right now. Then how much time a resident can take of paid leave. So you also have to think about that. And that, we use the institutional policies as a guideline for that. How much time a resident can take without extending their training. And then we look at our ABR policies as guidelines. And then how much time a resident can take to ensure competency. And then we also look at our program, our own programs policy, right? So I'll just share a little bit about what NYU's leave of absence policy has been. So this has been our programs policy up until this past year. Our residents, could take up to 20 weeks. And this would include the 12 weeks of vacation in the first 3 years of residency, because we wanted to ensure that they would be able to be prepared for the core exam at the end of that third year. So in a sense, they would be taking a max of 8 weeks of leave during the first 3 years. And then, of course, the 12 weeks of vacation. And here at our institution, it's sort of like you have to use the 4 weeks of vacation per year. It's sort of, if you can't add them on to the next year. So the scenario of that they could do just 2 weeks per year, which I think Dr. Canon spoke about, sort of wouldn't be possible at all. Then you can, for the total, the residents can take up to 24 weeks. And again, that includes the 16 weeks of vacation and then the 4 years of residency, in order to be able to finish, quote unquote, on time without taking extra time to tacking it on their residency. And then, of course, they could take more time if they wanted, as per FMLA, but that would possibly have to extend their training. Okay. So the problem with this policy for us has been that if a resident, a mother, wanted to have time off during pregnancy, during the first 3 years of residency, theory, they could take the 8 weeks of leave, which is, I think, what most of our residents do take, and then have the 12 weeks of vacation. They're maxed out at the 20 weeks, and then really only have 4 weeks of vacation left in their fourth year without any sick time or anything like that. And so I think, these were the issues. So really our residents didn't want to take the full 8 weeks of leave during those first 3 years. They would do maybe 6 weeks, and ensuring that they had some extra time in that fourth year. So now there have been recent changes to our institutional policy. Okay, so our GME office has actually revised the institutional's leave of absence. And so our NYU residents are able to get, in terms of paid time under sick time, they can get 6 weeks. And with a doctor's note, or if they have a C-section, they can get the 8 weeks under medical leave. And then NYU also has the paid leave bank. So it's NYU's policy where this is on a sliding scale. So if you've worked between 1 year and 5 years, you can get an extra 3 weeks. This is where most of our residents, our DR residents and IR residents land, unless, of course, the IR resident has done their internship at NYU. But for the most part, they get an extra 3 weeks. Okay. And then we also have, I don't want to complicate too much, the New York State paid leave that I think is added on to the FMLA, but that's if they extend that time. So usually we don't use that for our residents. And then of course we have vacation time. So really, if you're looking at this, a resident could in a sense have paid leave between 9 weeks to 11 weeks. In addition to, their 4 weeks of vacation for I want to say maternity leave, okay? And then just to round off, for completion's sake, for paternity leave, we also do have that. And so the partners don't get the sick time. They don't get the 6 weeks of sick time, but they do get the 3 weeks of NYU's paid family leave. So they're eligible for that. So now with the new ABR parental policy, it really, and I understand that this is the max, not to exceed an average of 8 weeks per academic year over the duration of residency. So for a DR residency program of 4 years, it's 32 weeks. We're planning on really, revising our policy and our suggestions really to sort of still fit within the ABR guidelines and be a little bit more flexible to our residents. We would like to change the 20 weeks to 24 weeks. Okay. Again, that includes our 12 weeks of vacation within the first 3 years, and then have that flexibility in that 4th year to also have a little bit of wiggle room in terms of sick time in the, so they have their 4 weeks of vacation and still have some extra time. So again, the total will be the 32 weeks. Do we want them to do this? No, we understand, I think that there is definitely, as program directors, we want to make sure that they are, that they're on rotations, that they are learning. But we understand that, there has to be some flexibility. So this is the way we were planning on addressing it. I think that addition of those 4 weeks in the first 3 years, although we've been a little bit concerned about it, we've looked at our schedule, and our residents are able to actually, meet all of the core requirements during the first 3 years, even with those extra 4 weeks, because we actually had a little bit of wiggle room in our 3rd year and 4th year where they had quote unquote selective time. So we do feel that they're able to actually rotate through those core rotations and still be prepared for the core exam, with the knowledge that every resident is a little different and that we have to be cognizant of that. And if someone needs the extra time, we have to give it. So the other thing that I do want to say about this is that, all of this is without taking extra time to finish residency. But I do think that if a resident wants that extra time, there's nothing wrong with extending the residency. I really do believe that. I think that we definitely, I think in the past, it just sounded like so taboo. And I think that it is really okay that if someone wants to extend their residency by a month, it's okay. Just start their fellowship a little late. That's just my personal opinion. I just, okay, next. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to some of those on the West Coast. I might be a little bit overambitious with my slides, so I'm going to try to blast through them so we can leave some time for Q&A. But thank you, APDR, for the invite on this panel. I think it's really important that we talk about this. I'm going to more talk about how we support the residents, not necessarily with the time off, but what do we actually do during their levels of kind of parental leave. Because I think every institutional policy will be different. Like Dr. Canon was saying, the ABR policy is the maximum, right? But your institutional policies will supersede the ABR policies. So, again, just for reference, what we do is similar to what Dr. Mercado did. But prior to the ABR guidelines, there was no maximum that we had really. We haven't had an opportunity came up where a resident exceeded that maximum or was off a lot. A lot of it came on a case-by-case basis where if we felt a resident wasn't had excessive time off or leave or sick leave, then that would be decided from the CCC and the program director talking together to decide if any additional time would be needed to make it up. But now that we have it, our typical leave policy is the residents do have 8 weeks of paid leave, 4 of that being vacation, 4 of that being FMLA, and then their additional, 4 of that being sick leave, and then an additional 4 of FMLA. And on average, they would take the whole 12 weeks, and we would encourage them to take all that time as needed too. But why offer all this, right? So really, there's a lot of studies and data out there that shows that there's a lot of benefit to parental leave associated with increased well-being, reduced stress around childbirth, decreased rates of postpartum depression, and really things for healthy baby too. 10% decrease in infant mortality, decreased rates of SID, asthma, diabetes, and obesity in childhood, and promotion of breastfeeding. Shameless plug here, this is my son when he was born a few years ago. But really, during the pregnancy, what we as a program do to support our residents is it's really, I think, comes down to first the culture. Oops, let's see here. Whoops, sorry. I think this comes down to the culture. This has to come from the top in the support that we're giving our residents. We're trying to establish a culture where the residents feel comfortable telling me that, hey, I'm really early in my pregnancy. I might need to make some schedule changes, or I'm going to need this time off. Can you please keep this quiet for now? So you want to really establish that culture that the residents feel comfortable coming to you, and that you have the support from your administration and chair, so that we can get the ball rolling on the FMLA paperwork and kind of really establish that culture of openness. And part of that too is being flexible, right? There's going to be a lot of schedule changes you might have to make for your residents, right? Some may not feel being comfortable on a floral rotation. Some may not feel comfortable telling their colleagues they can't take call for whatever reason, or they have to miss some things because of appointments. So again, a big part of it during the pregnancy period is to be flexible. And by the way, these are pictures of all of our residents and their families and things like that. And again, that's just part of it, just one part of it too. I think we also need to be really flexible in that postpartum period too, because there's a lot of other considerations. It's not just, okay, you had a baby, you come back to work now, right? But there's things to think about really in terms of making that transition back to work, right? That's not an easy thing. You've been at home with your child, and now you're leaving your child potentially with another caregiver and then going back to work. So again, first off, for parents, there's lots of follow-up appointments for babies in that first year. So being flexible, being able to give them that time, and being mindful that there may be other issues or complications that arise during pregnancy or early childhood. So part of that too is we have some flexibility in what we call wellness days for our residents that are not sick time, they're not vacation time. There are times where they can schedule appointments, or if they need to have a well visit for the baby. So that allows them that flexibility to do that. And really, we're trying to just maintain a healthy lifestyle for our residents. And also, we do have kind of dedicated pump. This is not one of them. This is a really fancy one. This is not one of our breastfeeding rooms, our breast pumping rooms, but Federal Labor Standards Act say that you do have to provide basic accommodations at work for breastfeeding moms. So again, part of that is being flexible and knowing that the resident may have to step out for half an hour, multiple times during the day to pump. So we give them that safe space to do that and the flexibility to do that, or even offering up one of our offices that's secure. So this, again, just another way to show your support for them. And again, also being mindful that this extends out way beyond their first year of life too, right? There are a lot of residents with young families. And again, just being mindful and flexible, because kids get sick, right? They're going to need sick visits, they're going to need appointments, and childcare issues come up sometimes. And again, especially with the pandemic, a lot of childcare places closed. So again, being mindful that maybe they have to leave at 5 p.m. because their daycare closes at 5:15, so they have to pick up their kid. And again, like I said, childhood illnesses happen. So the big point I've really gotten from support from the administration and the faculty is to be mindful and be flexible, because these things come up in our lives, and sometimes you can't predict them and sometimes you can, but in order to be the supportive as we can, these are the things to kind of think about. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Cannon, Dr. Mercado, and Dr. Ho for that wonderful discussion. So we do have some time for some questions. Some people have already said some things in the chat. Please put them in the Q&A, but I'll read the ones from the chat right now so we can get moving on those. So one of the questions by Dr. Neil Madden is the time away going to decrease elective time on core rotations, and core rotations will remain the same? So I don't know how we want to answer it. I don't know if the ABR had a vision for this, and then we can talk about how Chris and Cecilia do it.
For the parental leave from the ABR standpoint, not specifically around the core beyond that initial requirement to sit for the core exam of having at least completed the 32 of the 36 months. And the program director then attesting to, yes, although this is shorter than the 36 months, they're ready to sit for it.
For us, there has to be something that gives. I think our core rotations it's a pretty set curriculum in the first 3 years. So we really want the residents to have the same experience, whether you're IR, DR, or you have time off, that is that same experience. So there is then less flexibility, and there's obviously call responsibilities too. So what that means then is less flexibility or less elective time during that 4th year.
Yeah, and I mean, for us, I was talking a little bit specifically about the 3rd year, where we do have a little bit of elective time in that 3rd year. That would obviously change. We really, especially before that core exam, we want to make sure that everybody gets the experience where everybody's rotating through core rotations. So that would be probably the first thing that would go away.
Yeah. Same here as a program director. I actually, before all this was enacted, I had a resident way before all this talk and that this was also open and there was a great policy to support us from the ABR. I had a resident go out on bed rest. She dilated very early in her pregnancy and went out on bed rest. I was able to graduate her on time, essentially by stealing her elective time from her 4th year. But for her, that meant a lot to her. She wanted to move somewhere where she had parental support. So that was where her fellowship was going to be, which is going to segue into our next question. And so to her, it meant more to her to get to where her fellowship would be, where she had grandparent support to help her care for her child. And she was willing to forego some electives. And we still even managed to squeeze, she did an informatics elective for 1 week, a special community procedure elective for 2 weeks. We managed to squeeze a few in. It just wasn't as many as her counterparts. So yeah. So then a follow-up question is, how do we get fellowships to understand that this is okay? And this is a huge problem. I've run into this with residents in a different sense when they don't get their paperwork in on time and they don't get their license on time. And I tell them they should have thought of that before they didn't get their paperwork on time. But for unexpected life events, it's harder. How do you guys, any of you have had issues with fellowships accepting it? I know our internal fellowships don't even think about it twice. If they're internal with us, I encourage them to be internal if they're nervous about that.
It's interesting. I mean, it's really a culture change, right? That we have to do. We again, if it's internal, we haven't had an issue, and I'm in breast imaging, and I have to say, even we're very accepting. So we've always had at least one fellow that comes in a month later. But how do I get fellowships outside fellowships? That's a little harder. I think it ultimately is a culture change overall.
I do think it's a culture change. And I think the more we allow flexibility, it will finally catch on. I mean, there's nothing magical about July 1. I mean, it's silly to even think that way. So I'm hoping that this will progressively catch on and become the norm, but it will take a bit of time.
I know when I was a fellow, I was a women's imaging fellow. I think they just expected someone to show up pregnant every year. Like, I think they actually just, because it did at my fellowship, it happened every year. I think they just knew at least one of us would be pregnant and they deal with it. So yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And actually, Shanna said at Brigham, they recently just had an abdominal fellow start late because of parental leave. So another question from one of our panelists, Shanna, is if your programs have incorporated any changes to competency assessment rather than focus on time-based competency. Oh, that's a great, I have to say that I've had some residents that I thought to myself, if they go out on parental leave, I don't think I can graduate them on time because they were already behind. Now, I've never had them go out, thank goodness, but I could see it be an issue. we'll start with the two program directors, Chris and Cecilia.
I think that's why we didn't have a policy, prior to the ABR policy, we didn't have like a maximum time policy. We wanted to take it on a case by case basis because you'll have some residents that rotate through once or do a procedure once and they're like amazing and excellent. And you'll have some that will take more time. So that's why we based it off of not just my intuition or my assessment, but really then the CCC's assessment if additional time was needed. We haven't come across that yet, but that's where I think the feedback from the whole group becomes important because you're looking at the whole picture, right? Not just one area. And again, I think that was more, again, competency-based rather than time-based.
Yeah, and I would agree with Chris. And one of the residents 2 years ago who actually did, extend her training was really because she wanted to take an extra, she delivered as a fourth year and she wanted to take extra time, not because we didn't think she met the amount of time. So.
Yeah, that's great.
I think it speaks to an important cultural change as well. This doesn't have to be punitive and negative, right?
Exactly.
I think that's really important. And I say that I just for full disclosure, we will have 10 parental leaves in our residency this year alone. So
Wow.
Check back with me how I feel about all this in a year.
Yeah. I'm going to have 4 this year within our residency program. Well, two maternity and 2 paternity.
Is this a byproduct of COVID?
It's possible.
I absolutely think so.
Oh yeah. Oh, that part that there are babies. Yes. But so I actually I'm going to answer only the last few questions. We're running 5 minutes over, but I want to bring this up because I represent a very different program from the 3 of you. So we have 5 residents per year, 4 DR, 1 IR, and Neil also represents a smaller program and asked a great question about for smaller programs and being flexible with MFLA, how do you balance the burden to the other residents might experience and still feel that it ensures everyone is balanced? So I had never had the non-birthing parent take more than 2 weeks off. It's not that I wouldn't have allowed it. I mean, they all know, my feelings on this, but we never had. And now this year with the ABR parental leave policy, I do think my non-birthing parents, I have one taking up to 8 weeks and one taking 6 weeks. We've had non-birthing attendings take the full 3 months in my department recently, which I also think has encouraged other non-birthing residents to do this. It is hard. It's hard. And Neil, I would love to tell you I have the appropriate answer. My residents have been really great about it, really nice about it. Actually, I think the most burden goes to the chief residents who have to keep changing the schedule. But I've had no complaints. I just always ensure, like our hospital does have a policy though, that if people need to take extra call because of leave, we are allowed to pay them moonlighting fees. So if for some reason they have to take an exceptional amount of call due to people taking leave, our hospital has a policy that we can pay them extra, like a moonlighting compensation kind of, which does help a little, but I've honestly never had an issue, and we are a small program with a lot of call. But so far I haven't had an issue. However, I did get a little nervous this year with this many. The 3 kind of was like, oh God. So I think small is hard. I agree. It's hard. And it is a burden that you don't really know how to handle. And what I think it ends up is, well, people are on leave, the other residents get slammed. But then I think you're able to pay your residents back kind of when the other residents come back from leave somewhat, because you also don't want to slam the new parents either, like Chris was talking about with coming back. But I don't have a perfect answer, but I know if you have a program like that, that helps, that you can compensate them in some way. And then let's see, I've got another one. Oh, the wellness days. Let's talk about those. And then we'll take the one last question after that. So what we have at my institution is family sick days, is how we phrase them, where if your kid is sick or you need to bring them to a doctor's appointment or something, we use them. I have never seen this abused on my more difficult rotations at all. I have never seen this abused. They take it when they need it. I mean, actually, a lot of times it's on MAMA, which is their easiest rotation because it just happens, right? So honestly, I haven't seen it abused in our program. I don't know if any of you others have family sick time or wellness days or personal days. I really haven't seen it abused. I always look and I'm like, they're taking it actually on easier rotations, which has always surprised me because I think they are using it for the real reason. Anyone else with experience?
We actually have wellness days, and I think it's 2 wellness days per year. Yeah, we haven't seen it abused either.
Yeah, no. No, I think people who really have, I mean, I know with me, if I had nothing, we have 6 days when I was a resident, I would never have abused them because I had a sick kid. I was always, I had an extra week of leave I could have taken and I saved it because what if something happened to my kid and I had to take another week of leave? So I think for a lot of parents, they'll save them, but clearly everyone gets them. So everyone can take family sick time, but we had a resident whose mom had surgery. So he took family sick time. So everyone gets to use it, whether you're a parent or not. So I think everyone knows life has unexpected things and they kind of save them. And then the last question I'll take, despite this fabulous discussion, so everyone gets out on time, is if you end up extending residency, have any of you faced funding challenges because of the financial things? I'll tell you, we have never. My chairs always said there are certain things spending money on, and if somebody needs to extend, that's something we can spend money on. But bigger programs, I don't know.
We have some self-funded positions that allow for electives and these kinds of things. It hasn't been an issue, but I would hope you have your support of your GME because you're trying to get the best trained residents you can out there and sending them out in the world. So, but I could foresee it being an issue, but it hasn't come up personally.
Yeah.
And speaking with a resident, with the chairs across different departments, it's incredibly variable. Some of them it's well absorbed with the GME, others absorbed in the department budgets, and some of them there is absolutely no flexibility. And so there's a wide variability here.
I agree.
Yeah, so I think for NYU, I think the GME absorbs the first month. So if it's
that's like us.
within that.
GME absorbs a certain amount and then the department has to just absorb the rest. Yeah. But I agree. It is something to think about for standardization. So that no program is in the position, like Neil said, that they just can't extend because the department can't afford it. GME won't pay for it. And then you're kind of in a bind. So it is an important thing to think about for the future. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists again. You guys were wonderful. Thank you to Dr. Ho, Dr. Canon, Dr. Mercado, Dr. Awan, and Dr. Matalon. I appreciate all your expertise and knowledge. And thank you to everyone who attended and asked such amazing questions. And thanks to Kate Gibson for facilitating everything and doing such a wonderful job prepping for this. We will have the recording and I will also try to send out a summary. Give me a week or so. It's a busy time of year, as all of you PDs know, but I will try to get out a really great summary. But thank you again for everybody. I hope people got good tips to take back to their department.
Thank you. And thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.